Hey, this is Chris Franco, and you are listening to Compound Money Quietly, the CMQ Investing podcast. CMQ investors, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. If you have not yet subscribed or followed the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you take a quick second and do that. That way you will be first to receive updates about these new episodes, and you'll be able to use this information before everyone else. With the exception of my calf implants, my hair plugs, and maybe my nose job, learning the history of investing has been one of the best investments that I've ever made. Recently, someone left a very angry series of comments on a post that I put up on Instagram through the Charlie Munger Quotes account. They said that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are dinosaurs who failed to adapt, who stopped learning, and who missed out on tech stocks like Netflix, Google, and Facebook. It's almost exactly what investors were saying in the year 2000. And that's where we'll go in this episode. We're going to go back to a time when people thought Warren Buffett was done. Now we've got the CMQ Time Machine. It's all revved up, ready to go.
All systems are a go.
2,
It's a blast from the past.
0.
Welcome to Omaha.
In January of 2000, you could buy one share of Berkshire Hathaway stock for $56,100. By March 10th, the price for one share was down to $41,300. And the very next month, on April 29th, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger took the stage for the annual Berkshire Hathaway Shareholders meeting. In Alice Schroeder's biography of Warren Buffett, The Snowball, she describes this meeting as humiliating for Warren Buffett. I'll read you some portions of that book. It'll give you a better sense of how Warren Buffett was perceived by the general public at this time. When describing how Berkshire was trading for just over $41,000 per share, Schroeder notes that the legendary Buffett premium, that is, the high price that the stock supposedly traded at just because of Buffett, well, that was gone. The NASDAQ index had just reached 5,000, and since January 1999, it had doubled. One money manager said that investors like Buffett were, quote, made obsolete in 1999 by mavericks who say the old laws of investing have been repealed and backed up their theories with eye-popping numbers. Buffett was miserable about the bad publicity, though he never considered changing his investment strategy. Owners of Berkshire apparently would have been better off investing in an index of the market over the past 5 years, the most prolonged drought in Berkshire's history. Buffett understood the basics of computers perfectly well, but he would not consider buying a technology stock at just any price. When it comes to Microsoft and Intel, he said, I don't know what that world will look like 10 years from now, and I don't want to play in a game where the other guy has an advantage. I'm skipping forward just a little bit, but someone in the media referred to Buffett as formerly the world's greatest investor. Schroeder continues, never in Buffett's career had resolution and clear thinking been put to the kind of test that he had endured for the past 3 years. Every indication in the market said that he was wrong. He had only his inner conviction to steer him straight, and this was the needy man who was so sensitive to public criticism that he ran from anything that would expose him to it, who had sculpted his life around managing his reputation, and who fought like a tiger against anything that could sully it. Yet, even under siege to his reputation, this time, Buffett never fought back. He neither wrote editorials, nor dueled in the press, nor gave television interviews to defend himself. He and Munger carried on their regular dialogue with Berkshire shareholders, saying that while the market was overvalued, they could not predict how long it would last. Finally, not for the record, but as a warning and a way of teaching, Buffett explained his views once and for all and predicted that the market would fall far short of investors' hopes for 2 decades in a tour de force of a speech at Sun Valley. We discussed this speech in the episode titled Warren Buffett's Warning to Investors in 1999. Highly recommend listening to that if you haven't yet. You will not be disappointed. On March 11th, 2000, Berkshire Hathaway issued its annual report, and Buffett graded himself a D for failing to invest Berkshire's capital. He did not say, however, that he considered avoiding technology stocks to have been a mistake. Okay, now let's go to April 29th. The year again is 2000, and it is the day of the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholders meeting in Omaha. By 4 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, several hundred restless people wearing laminated meeting credentials on lanyards around their necks lined up outside the Civic Auditorium, waiting for the doors to open. 3 hours later, People stampeded past the guards who checked their credentials to claim the prime seats on the floor. By 8 o'clock, it became clear that they needn't have bothered to show up before dawn. Half the seats in the house were empty. 30 minutes later, the auditorium held 9,000 people. Attendance was down 40% from the 15,000 who had come the year before.
It's like a funeral in here.
Around 9:30, Buffett and Munger walked onto the stage and looked out over the shrunken crowd of the faithful. After a 5-minute business meeting, the question and answer session opened as usual, with shareholders lined up at microphones positioned around the auditorium, lobbing questions. Somebody asked about technology stocks. "I don't want to speculate about high tech," Buffett said. "Anytime there have been real bursts of speculation, it eventually gets corrected." He compared the market to the phony riches of chain letters and Ponzi schemes. Quote, "Investors may feel richer, but they're not." Then he goes to Charlie Munger. "Charlie?" This is great, by the way. Munger opened his mouth. The audience perked up slightly. Munger often said, "Nothing to add." But whenever Buffett handed the microphone to him, the auditorium hummed with the subtlest sensation of danger. It was like watching an experienced lion tamer working with a chair and a whip. "The reason we use the phrase wretched excess," Munger said, "is because it produces wretched consequences. It's irrational. If you mix raisins with turds, they're still turds." The crowd gasped. Did he say turds? Did Charlie just compare internet stocks to turds in front of children who had come with their parents?
You know, first it's turds, then it's heroin.
Not to mention in front of the press? He said turds. It took some time for the meeting to settle back into its normal rhythm. The questions droned on as Buffett and Munger listened, unwrapping dilly bars with much rustling. Shareholders began to voice complaints. They didn't like the stock price. One said she was going to look into correspondence schools since her Berkshire Hathaway stock would no longer pay for college. Gaylord Hanson of Santa Barbara, California, stood at the microphone to harangue that he had bought Berkshire near its highs in 1998 because of Buffett's track record and had come out okay, only because the money he'd lost had been made up by 4 technology stocks. He urged Buffett to invest at least 10% of Berkshire's assets in technology. Quote, "The only game in town. Isn't there enough left in your brain power to maybe pick a few?" End quote. It was worse than humiliating. Looking out into the audience, Buffett saw that, for the first time, some of them assumed he was letting them down. The effort of nearly 50 years rolled backward, undone. His own shareholders turned against him. His age suddenly signified not experience, but obsolescence. In the press, people now referred to him as an old man. And I should mention that he was 69 years old. Today he's 90. And the same criticism that Warren Buffett was hearing back in the late 90s and into the year 2000, those same things are being said about him today. I will likely have a follow-up to this episode because even just in the last hour, I've come across, I'm a very curious person, so, as I was thinking this was all wrapped up, I said, let me look this up, and I found something that I'm, really excited about that describes what happened after the Berkshire meeting. And I just have so many more thoughts to share about, what Berkshire Hathaway is, what Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have built, and why I find learning more about them to be invaluable, not just as an investor, but as a person who's a business owner, an entrepreneur, and just a guy in his 30s. But let's conclude with what happened after this meeting, how things ended up, at least at the high level. And this again comes from Alice Schroeder's book, The Snowball. This quote begins at the start of chapter 55, and I quote, "The internet boom had boomeranged. The dot-coms were dying at the pace of one a day. The NASDAQ was trading at less than half the value of its peak. The old economy stocks were still swooning too. Buffett's reputation, however, began to revive. Berkshire dipped its soup ladle into a huge stock pot of capital for Buffett to buy private companies, bankrupt companies, under-the-radar companies, everything from Benbridge Jewelers to Benjamin Moore Paint. Even so, by the end of 2000, Berkshire still had billions of unused capital, a build in the basement, thatched to the rooftop, massive money that continued to pour out from the self-perpetuating cash-spinning machine." End quote. This has been Compound Money Quietly, the CMQ Investing podcast. My name is Chris Franco. Thank you for listening. We'll talk soon.